But hi, my name is Tracy Veeken. I am the principal of the Spanish Immersion Program. And, thanks, Pam. Got a little root there. When some legislation came up questioning about capital outlays and future building funds, I had some parents that came to me and said, I'd like to have some more information on this. What impact does that have on the Sioux Falls School District, on Spanish Immersion Program, but Howard Wood Field, and future building projects as well. So there were some questions that were asked. What exactly, where do we stand, and what legislation is out there about funding? And so I kind of sweet-talked the business manager, who happens to be an expert in that area, to having the conversation with some of us and just providing us some information on that, and it turned into what it is tonight. So we like to welcome all of you here. Bev has shown there's some handouts back there regarding your legislators. There's some fast facts for you about school, education, and funding. And then there's some cards too in case you have some notes, because he's going to leave enough time at the end that we can ask any questions that we might have. So you'll get to ask the questions yourselves, but if you're like me, I think of it, and if I don't write it down, then when it's time to ask the question, I've forgotten. So that's kind of what that's like. But we'll have plenty of time at the end to ask any questions that you have of Mr. Veek or anyone else that you would like to hear. So I guess without further ado, I'd like to introduce Todd Veek.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, everybody, for coming out tonight. We're grateful for the Lincoln-Washington game, and we're assuming this place would be full of people tonight. So, can't hear me? What? Oh, talk into the mic. Thanks. So that's the good news. We have plenty of room because of the Lincoln-Washington game. The bad news is Ben, who's taping this, told me he only has a 2-hour tape, so we can't go over 2 hours. So that's the bad news. Just kidding. For those of you that don't know me, I'm just kidding. What we're doing tonight is I agreed to talk about school funding 101, definitely that capital outlay bill part of it, but also hoping to give a basic primer on schools' funds, taxes that go into it, and some of the issues that schools see. So tonight we're going to talk about the types of school district funds, briefly on that. We're going to talk about sources of revenues, where the money comes from, what taxes or whatnot. Talk about the expenditures, where it goes, and specifically the effect on salaries. And usually we talk about teacher salaries when we talk about that, mostly because the data is just very much available to us, but it applies to all school district personnel. Then we're going to talk about the capital outlay issues, and then we'll take questions at the end. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is this is South Dakota Public Schools. It's for FY13, and I use that phrase. It's fiscal year 13. It's the 2012-2013 school year. So I'll talk about FY14, FY13, FY98. It's the school year that ended in the June of that month. So we have data available through 2013 for the state. And as you can see, these are the 5, what we call in Sioux Falls. It's a phrase that makes some sense to us. It's not widely used, I don't think. Tax-supported funds. There are 5 funds that schools are allowed to levy for. A property tax for. The general fund, the capital outlay fund, the special education fund, the pension fund, and the bond redemption fund. And I'll give you just a brief description of each of these. The general fund is the daily operations of the district. They pay for the teachers, they pay for the custodians, the heat and the lights, and all that good stuff. So it's the biggest fund by far of a district. You can see it's at 67.5%, and it's the general operating fund of the district. And it's when there's a debate in the legislature about school funding, they're usually talking about the general fund. The special ed fund, and statewide, that's at 13.3% of all these funds. That is essentially the general fund for kids that are on an IEP. So it pays for the teachers for special ed, it pays for special administration, it pays for transportation for those kids. But that's essentially kind of like the general fund for kids on an IEP. Capital outlay fund is 15% of of the total, and that pays for bricks and mortar buildings, pays for additions, remodeling of schools, pays for the roofs when you have to fix your roof, or any other maintenance and repair you need to do, and it pays for equipment. I think computers in Sioux Falls is a big one. A lot of districts pay for school buses out of the capital outlay fund, lawnmowers, things like that. I would just say that in Sioux Falls, we contract for busing services, so we don't buy buses, but that's a big expenditure as well. Then there's two smaller funds. Bond redemption fund. If you were around in 1997, you might remember an election that was held to fund a bond of about $30 million for the capital improvement plan, the original capital improvement plan. If you can get a 60% supermajority on that, then you just levy what you have to pay off that bond. They're usually 20 or 25 years. And statewide, it isn't a big part of the picture, as you can see, but when you hear about those school bond elections, that the revenue for that gets paid out of that fund, or the expenses for paying off those bonds get paid out of the bond redemption fund. Then there's a small 30-cent levy that's available for pension funds for school. Once again, not a real big deal, but schools utilize those to pay for any retirement incentives they have, or SDRS. So where does the money come from that makes up all those funds? It's mostly, as you can see, property taxes. It's almost $600 million. State aid, general fund is $330 million almost. Special education state aid is about $50 million. Federal grants is by far the next biggest source, $161 million. But that's where the funds come from, or that's where the funding comes from. All right, that's the state. This is Sioux Falls. This year's budget, I moved it ahead a couple years, FY15, because we know our data because we prepare our own budget, obviously. Our total tax-supported funds is $206.7 million. Our general fund's a little bit higher than the state average, 70%. What you might see here is special ed's a bigger percentage of our budget, 17.2, and capital outlay fund, we'll talk about this later, we're a little bit smaller than the state. I think the state average was a bit higher. We're about 10% there, but it's basically the same. But you can see there's variances from school to school, including us. I got a segue over into talking about our biggest revenue source in the general fund, state aid. And I got to go to some spreadsheets here. Hopefully this will make sense. State aid formula is really pretty simple. It's it's got three components. State aid equals local need minus local effort. So all the state does is take your fall enrollment, multiply it times whatever the state allocation is, and in this case it's 47, 81, 14 in this example. Or take that times your fall enrollment, and that's your local need. And then the state says, now we're going to set the property tax levies for the schools, what they can charge. And if you levy at that max, based on your valuation, how much can you raise? And that's called local effort. And state aid just simply equals local need minus local effort. And the purpose of that is so no matter if you live in a property tax rich district or a property tax poor district, you're going to get the same amount of dollars per student. Now there's some other factors in there. There's a small school factor that is up to 20% and things like that. But in general, you're going to get that dollar amount, that $4,700 and some odd dollars per student, whether you live in a real property rich environment or a real property poor environment. And that this was passed in 1995, and it went into effect in 1998 fully. So that is what we all live under, the funding formula, and it's what we usually debate out in peers, how much it's going to go up each year. I'm just going to give you just a sample of how this works. This is roughly the Sioux Falls School District data. We have 23,000 kids plus a little bit, per pupil allocation of $47.81. Local need is $110 million. And then that's our valuation is, you can see, one other thing I should point out. There's different levies there. There's an ag rate, there's an owner-occupied rate, there's a commercial rate. That's because, for those of you that were around in 1995, when the state did property tax relief, talked about 30% property tax relief, they funded it through the state aid formula. So what they said is commercial basically didn't get any of the relief. Ag got a little bit more than owner-occupied, and owner-occupied got some right about in the middle. So I'll occasionally refer to, well, that is property tax relief, that's state aid. It's all funded through the state aid formula. If you think of, if you were the governor at the time, you're thinking about doing property tax relief, say, well, there's several ways you could do it. You could send the money to the county, but then the county would have to figure out how to get all the money back to people. You could send checks to people, but there is no county state aid. Checks to every individual isn't practical. So what they said is, in the state aid formula, every school basically gets state aid. So we can just lower the levy they can charge and replace it with state aid. And then it's about 140 or 150 million dollars. Back in 95, when it passed, state aid was about 30%, a little bit less than that, of the total general fund pot of money. It's now about 53%. So that 23% on 600 and some million total statewide local need. That 23% is difference is property tax relief. So one thing I wanted to point out how this works, though, is if your property values go up because of this, the state is essentially just topping off the formula. If your property values go up or they go down, but your students stay the same, you don't get more or less money. The state aid is just more or less. So I've got a variable in here. And you can see right now state aid is $52 million. I'm just going to increase the valuation of this land by 10%. And so what happens is the local need doesn't change, it's had the same number of students. The valuation changed, so the local effort went up by 5.8 million. Then the state aid just goes down to offset it. Does that make sense? So if you think of filling a glass of water, the glass is going to be full no matter what. You dump in the local effort first, and if it fills it a fourth of the way, the state aid will top it off to the top. If it goes 3/4 of the way, the state aid will just take it to the top. So as your valuation goes up or down relative, it really doesn't matter for your state aid. What matters in general fund state aid formula is your number of your pupils, because one more pupil or one less pupil will affect your total state aid formula funding. Thanks for bearing with me on that. Back to the... All right, so that's where the money comes from, and that's how the state aid formula works, which we obviously take a lot of time on because the property taxes and the state aid are such a big part of that money. So how does the money get spent? Here you can see this is the whole state again. 65% is spent on salaries, and this is general fund. 17.7% benefits, and the rest is pretty small, obviously. Purchase services, supplies and materials, and other dues and fees, things like that. So the total amount spent on salaries and benefits is 82.9%. So you can see the general fund is mainly driven by what you pay your staff, how many staff you have, and what you pay them. All right, the state accounting system has functions, so I just told you about the what, salaries and things like that. Now the functions we say are the why. Why are you spending the money? Why you're spending salaries, but why? Most of it, as you can see, is on instruction, 59%, and support services are next at 36%. Co-curricular, everybody's interested in co-curricular, is at 4.3%, and all the others is just a small 0.5%. But statewide, about 4% of the budget spent on co-curricular. In Sioux Falls, it's more like between 2 and 3 in Sioux Falls on co-curricular. Co-curricular, yeah, it's sports, and it's activities like band, debate, things like that, oral interp, things like that, plays, items like that. Yes. in that category.
EAs and special ed teachers, are those considered instructional?
Yeah, that would be, and based on, depending on what they're doing, it'd be instruction. The special ed teachers for sure. The EAs probably, if they're aiding in instruction, yeah. This is the Sioux Falls School District, pretty close to the state. I won't go through all of these, but our salaries and benefits are 85.3% of our budgeted expenditures. Once again, we're talking about the general fund now. Then I broke it out just a little differently here. The salaries and benefits, how is that spent by type? Our central administrators are 2.2% of the salaries. Building administrators, 5.2%, so administration is 7.4%. Teachers are 72%. Clerical, 4%. Custodial, 7.8%. Specialists, those are like computer support folks, things like that, are 2%, and other would be almost 7%. You can see the majority, obviously, of the salaries are spent on teacher salaries. That kind of matches the instruction function I showed you for the state, but two different ways of looking at kind of the same type of information. All right, now we get to the fun stuff. Funding challenges. I'll tell you just a quick little story since we got a little bit of time. Since I've been here 14 years, or I'm in my 14th year, and since I've been here, I've always gone over to USF in the summer and talked to one or two different classes on school funding, kind of like this, but then a deeper discussion of how we budget in Sioux Falls. And prior to coming here, I worked for the State Department of Education for 5 years. I was their fiscal officer. Spent a lot of time in the legislature testifying. So my early on joke at USF was, I spent the prior 5 years telling schools they had plenty of money, and I've spent the last 5 years telling the state, hey, we need more money. And so, that is, and as I've given this presentation, we've talked about challenges with the state aid formula, and there was issues for increasing, schools with increasing enrollment, and Harrisburg is a great example of that. I don't know if they quite still are, but they're increasing at 10% a year. And they used to get paid 1 year in arrears. That was taken care of in 2007. And then there's schools that are declining in enrollment, and they say, if I lose 1% of my kids, I can't cut 1% of my teachers because I'm losing a few kids out of each classroom. So they put in a kind of a fix for that, where you get to average over 2 years, so the decline isn't quite as fast. So I used to, with the USF classes, would talk about those challenges. But basically, the big one comes down to the index factor in the state aid formula, where it's 3% or inflation, whichever is less. And I believed it then, I believe it now, it's still the biggest problem with the formula. And we'll get into kind of why here. No, it would be to just change the index factor. Formula is pretty good. It guarantees everybody, no matter if they're property rich or property poor, based on a per student amount, you're going to get the same amount of money. The formula is pretty good. The issue is, how much does that go up a year? And I really haven't focused on that. Right now it's written, it goes up 3% or inflation, whichever is less. And is that a good number? So that's what we're going to look at. So first of all, I've got this slide here. We're back to Sioux Falls. This is the general fund. And the blue are the revenues that are derived from the state aid formula. And those are almost 80% of our total revenues come from the state aid formula. Then there's this green area called restricted. That's federal money. For the vast majority of school districts, all but maybe 20, and there's 150 in the state. Virtually every dollar of federal money you get, they tell you how you can spend it. You can't use it to balance your budget. Our biggest federal source is Title I. It's over $4 million. We can't say we're going to cut the Title I expenditures, but we're going to use the $4 million to raise teacher salaries for everybody. You can't do that with the federal money. So if you don't spend the federal money the way the federal grant program wants you to spend the federal money, you have to give it back. So you can't balance your budget on the federal money. And then the rest here, this 12.4%, what I call unrestricted others. The biggest amount in our school district is we've opted out for $7.5 million. That's the biggest chunk of that. There's the bank franchise tax, which goes back to some school. The state gets some of that, but it goes back to school districts. That's about $2 million, but we're not talking about a ton of money. The biggest part of that, there's, every 4 years you vote for the School and Public Lands Commissioner. That's about $1.5 million, $1.6 million. So we're not talking about a ton of money because our total general fund budget is over $140 million. But, so the biggest part, and when you get and you strip out the federal money, because you can't balance your budget on the federal money, 86.6% of our discretionary general fund revenue comes from the general fund state aid formula, and which goes up 3% or inflation, whichever is less. And then like we talked about earlier, where do we spend our money? 85.3% on salaries and benefits. So the obvious conclusion that I'm sure you've all drawn is if one goes up 2%, the other can go up 2%. If you try to raise salaries over an extended period of time by 3%, when you're averaging 2% from the state aid formula, you're going to run into trouble in a hurry. And so essentially, schools can afford to pay teachers or increase salaries for teachers what the state aid formula goes up. That's just simple math. So this is something that is probably not a surprise. What might be a surprise is 94, South Dakota was 49th out of 50. I took Washington, D.C. out of this. Coincidentally, probably, in 95 is when the law passed, when the formula changed. Didn't go into effect fully till 98, but it was passed in 95. So this isn't surprising. Everybody knows this stat. This next one might be surprising. If we added a 51st state to the union and it was the Sioux Falls School District, this is what that chart would look like. In Sioux Falls, back in the 90s, we got as high, or low, whichever way you think of it, but high as 34th in average teacher salary. We're now 50th in the last year we have in 2013. I'm guessing when the 2014 data comes out, we might get to 49th, maybe to 48th at the best, but we're now sitting at 50. We'd be the second lowest state of pay, and we're the third highest paying district in the state. So there is a misconception out there, I've heard, that the large districts, yeah, there's a teacher salary issue in South Dakota, but not in the large districts. We're the third highest paying district in the state, and we'd rank 50th if we were a state. So that is a misconception. So with data like this, back in 2006, our area chamber generously agreed to form a blue ribbon task force where they picked 15 to 20 business leaders to look at the teacher salary issue, to work with some of us from the school district. And we went through a lot of data. And I'm going to let you read the back of the book first. The legislative proposal, they had one in 2007, they had one in 2008, 2009, and 2010. It changed a little over the years, but essentially it said the state aid index factor should go up 4% a year. And then by 2010 they said, but that shouldn't exceed what the state general fund goes up. So if the state's having a bad year and the general fund is only going to increase 2%, then the schools would only get 2%. But if the state was having a good year, typical year, and the general fund was going to increase by 5% a year, then schools would get 4% in the state aid formula. Not 5, but 4. So that school teachers could essentially keep up with the salaries. They had a performance incentive. They said anything, if you want to do other stuff, fund the 4% first, and then you can do performance incentives or any of this other kind of pet projects that might come out of the different types of legislatures. But they said don't even look at that until you've got the teacher base pay up to where it needs to be on an annual basis. Now that was what they came up, and then the recession hit, and we haven't really come back with a strong funding proposal since.
Like business people?
Yes, business people went out from the different chambers, testified in favor of this. We did get TCAP for 2 years. It was originally supposed to be for 5. We got it for 2 years, and then it was taken away. The TCAP would be above the 4% part of it. That's what was actually funded to it. It was $600,000 in the Sioux Falls School District. Was that TCAP program? But it never really got wings. But the statewide, various chambers did pitch in, and it was honestly a great effort. We actually got it to pass the Senate, but it failed in the House. So what was the data they looked at to come up with these recommendations? Now, this is a little odd, because I'm talking to you about something that happened in 2006. We had 2005 data at the time, and we're sitting here in 2015 talking about it. So what we've done is showed you what they originally looked at and then tried to update some of these slides. So I'm just going to give you the basics of how this worked. From 90 to 95, we were under the old formula, and the average teacher salary increased 4.1% a year. And you can pick a area you're interested in. I just focus on the kind of the lower left quadrant there. Or the average private workforce salary went up 4%, and then I'll just run you over to the other side, the right, as you look at it anyway. State government employees were growing at 5.4% a year in pay. It's another governmental entity. Then from 95 to 2005, the 10 years after the passage of the formula, the teacher salaries had dropped to 2.7. The private workforce was still right there at about 4.1. State government had dropped to about 3.4. And then we said, well, what if this trend continues for 10 more years? What's going to happen? And I'm just going to compare. What we've got here is three numbers. Two of them are actual. The 95 and the 05 numbers are actual. The 2015 was projected. And the trend we were seeing is, like if you look at the professional scientific up there, these are all individuals in the industry. In 1995, a teacher's average salary was 108% of the average salary in the professional scientific technology world. By 2005, that had fallen to 89%, and it was projected to fall to 74%. The line that came out of the Blue Ribbon Task Force was that we can see this problem coming, we have to do something about it. It hasn't been a catastrophe yet, but it's going to eventually hit, and we can do something about it now, make a small change now, or deal with a catastrophe when it hits. And then the workforce, you can see they were 135, potentially falling. You can see the teachers were falling against all other, and this is South Dakota. We're comparing teachers in South Dakota to workers in South Dakota. We're not comparing them to the U.S. with this. So this is a new slide. So we had projected to 2015. We have data right now through 2013. So we said, let's go back and use the exact same methodology. What would we have projected if we had only gone to 2013, not to 2015? Because we don't have data for 2015. So I'll just point out the teacher would have been, we would have projected 107% of the private workforce, and scientific teacher would have been at 77%. Now we know what actually happened. And so since 2005, and this obviously counts the recession, everybody's pay increases went down. But teachers dropped to 1.7, scientific dropped to 3.4, the workforce dropped to 3.3, state government to 2.6. Everybody's pay dropped over this period of time because of the recession. And then where did the teachers end up compared to they're at 78% of the scientific, they're at 105 of the workforce. We're still on schedule. The dollar amounts aren't exactly right because everybody's pay dropped. But basically across all these areas, they're still on schedule to keep falling further and further behind their neighbors. And that's what it is. One of the members of our task force said, you know how you used to go to the mall and you'd see your kid's neighbor in the mall and they'd be shopping and you'd be shopping? Now you go to the mall and you see them, they're working there and you're buying something from them. And I thought that was pretty profound. So this now takes it out to 2020. We can maybe try to go forward 7 more years. And you can see the trend is just going to continue. So how do you do that? Well, you got to fix the 3% inflation, whichever is less. So as schools have asked for, they're saying that 3% inflation doesn't work. And we think we proved it. Some of the responses we've heard, you may have heard them, you may have even had some of these thoughts, have been these. The state does not set teacher salaries, local school boards do. And there's kind of 2 little subsets of that. One is, if the states give school more money, how can I be sure schools will actually spend money on teacher salaries? And the second thing you might hear or think is teacher salaries are ranked 50th, but South Dakota per pupil spending is higher ranked. So it is a school board problem, right? I mean, because it's true, school per pupil funding is not 50th in South Dakota. We'll talk about that in a minute. Another thing you may think or have heard is South Dakota has a low cost of living compared to other states. And does that explain our 50th ranking? And another one is, where will the dollars come from to increase teacher salaries? I went to a legislative forum a couple weeks ago, and one individual there said, if we're going to increase teacher pay, we're going to have to raise taxes. That's just flat out. Well, is that, the question is that correct? So, as we get into this, do you remember this slide? And we've already seen it. The bottom line on this slide is, once again, of the discretionary revenue schools get for the general fund, for us in Sioux Falls, it's 86.6% comes from the state aid formula. Statewide, it's a little bit over 80, exact same concept. Salaries and benefits are 85.3. We can't spend more on salaries and benefits than we can get from the state aid formula, because if one of those two gets out of whack, your budget, you'll either grow your fund balance or you'll decrease it. But you can't go long at funding at 4% when you're getting less than 3 in the state aid formula. So how can we be sure that school boards will give aid increases to teachers? I've heard that too. Average teacher salary increase since FY98, that's the first full year of the formula, is 2.3%. The average per student increase in the state aid formula is 2%. And those numbers prior to the 8.6% cut back in the 2011 legislature, those numbers were more like 2.8 and 2.7. They were almost exactly the same. The funding, or the salary increases was 2.8. The state aid increase was 2.7. Now with the 8.6% cut, it's widened a little bit, because I don't believe any school district gave 8.6% cuts in salaries, but they have lagged, obviously. So they're at 2.3 and 2. Now, how does that compare? Does that make sense? We need some context on that. The average per capita increase in the rest of the state budget, the general fund budget, it's about $1.1 or $1.2 billion right now. It's 4.3%. Now, if you told a legislator that, the first thing I'm sure you'd hear is most of that's Medicaid. And Medicaid is an expensive program for all states, not just South Dakota. And South Dakota has had to match a higher and higher percentage rate, so that's true. So DSS and Department of Social Services and the Department of Human Services are the two agencies that spend Medicaid money. So we pulled those out and looked at the rest of the state government. The rest of the state government over this period of time, per capita, and that's not the budget, that's per capita. We estimate the population. Well, we know the 2000 population, we know the 2010 population. Draw a line through those, and we can estimate the rest, the populations on the out years. So on a per capita basis, so you're comparing pure pupil to per capita, the increase has been 2.9%. What's the difference between 2.9% and 2% school funding over 16 years? Doesn't seem like a lot, 0.9. But over 16 years, it's $101 million, which I think there's roughly 10,000 teachers in the state. It would be if you gave it all to teacher salaries, it'd be a $10,000 increase. Now, about half of a general fund budget, a little bit more than that, goes to teacher salaries. There's benefits and stuff, but that'd be a $5,000 increase. Would be a huge increase. So that 0.9% does add up over 16 years of funding. Second one, teachers are ranked 50th, but South Dakota per pupil spending is higher ranked. So it is a school board problem. What are the schools doing with the money? Because we're not 50th ranked in money. So here's a bunch of rankings that are out there. It's a great source. It's called Virginia Compared to the Other States. It's the 2014 edition. It's prepared by the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission from Virginia. And they've ranked states, and I went through there and pulled out different rankings and put South Dakota's rankings on here. And those are ranked, doesn't tell you a lot, but those are South Dakota rankings. So, first of all, I have to tell you, one thing they didn't rank is state, local, and federal funding per pupil, which is a stat I've heard several times. from different people. And it's 39th. I got that off the Census Bureau. It's 39th. So I'll tell you that right there. But what they did rank is state per capita revenue, all sources of money. It would be federal money, it would be general fund money, it would be gas tax money, it would be interest or dividends and whatnot they earn in their different trust funds and all that. So South Dakota ranks 26 in just this nebulous all revenue, and you can't use all revenue for general fund activities. So let's narrow this down a little bit more. Virginia, in their document, ranked per pupil state and local pre-K through 12 expenditures. Now, we don't talk a lot about pre-K in South Dakota when we talk about school funding, because there isn't a lot of state and or local funds for pre-K through 12 or pre-K activities. So I threw in on the bottom there, you can see we're 42nd in K through 12 expenditures per pupil. So we're better than 50th. We're 42nd. Remember, the federal money you can't use to balance your budget. You can't use to increase teacher salaries across the board. You can only use it for the federal programs. So we're 42nd in K through 12 state and local per student expenditures. Let's look at another one. This is where the state ranks in per capita general fund expenditures. Now that's the fund that they've got obviously the most flexibility with. So roughly pretty close. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, we're a rural state. Maybe not here in Sioux Falls, but we're a pretty rural state. And there's inefficiencies that come with the ruralness of the state. Call it sparsity. This is a phrase that you actually use in the state aid formula. So you can see that here. The per capita state government FTEs are 19th. And that's in that Virginia document again. And I would expect that because we're rural. We don't have the efficiencies of having where you can have one office. You have 66 counties. You got to have folks out in most of those counties. I get it, but the same applies to schools. Schools do not have the efficiencies that go on in other states as well. As a matter of fact, we're the fourth. There are 4 states that are more rural or more sparse than we are. They're North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and anybody? Alaska. Yeah. You know where they rank in state and local per pupil revenues? They rank 19th, 30th, 4th, and 7th. And that makes up, it needs to make up a lot for that ruralness, that sparsity. So I would contend that's the reason we're 50th in teacher salaries while being 42nd in state and local funds per pupil, is because we are inefficient. It's just a matter of it's just a fact of our sparsity. Now, here's one way the state can make up for its sparsity. So by the way, the state is 43rd in average state government employee salary. And one way to make up for that is to not spend as much on state aid. So we're 50th or 49th, 50th in pre-K through 12, we're 49th in K through 12 per student revenues from the state. And one way to make up, that is roughly a third of the budget, the state budget. If you slow that down, that's one way to make up for the ruralness, to be able to get to be 43rd in average state government employee salary, is to not spend as much on a big chunk of your budget, just state aid. So here's just a couple of other topics of interest. State motor fuel taxes, that 22 cents a gallon that's been proposed to go up 2 cents a year, kind of forever. So that'd be a 9% increase this year. By 2040, it would be down to 3%. Remember, schools get 3% inflation, whichever's less. It would take till 2040, if that passed, for that tax to get down to that. We're 33rd in state motor fuel taxes, obviously way above 42nd, whatnot. And then we're 4th in per capita state and local road expenditures. And I understand why. We have a few people driving on a lot of roads. I just heard on the news yesterday, the radio, that the South Dakota Secretary of Transportation was out at the Senate testifying to that. We are very rural, very sparse, and we need road funding because we don't have the population that most states do to support it. I agree. And there's a proposal that hasn't a bill yet to raise about $50 million a year in road funding, and there's another one that's already in there that's supposed to raise about $100 million a year. But to say that we're 39th or 42nd in state and local per pupil expenditures, and schools are not spending the money, right? That's why teachers are 50th. No, we're a rural state, and we're rural for schools as well as roads and everything else. South Dakota has a low cost of living compared to other states. Joyce Smolnitsky, she's the head of the South Dakota Budget and Policy Institute, gives a great talk. It's about an hour long on school funding issues. But specifically, I'm pointing to her part of the talk where she looked at the purchasing power of South Dakota teachers after accounting for no state income tax versus the region, and then the cost of living versus the region. And she defined the region. I think it's a good definition of the states that touch South Dakota. Montana, after you account for both those things, teachers make 13% more. Nebraska, 16. North Dakota, 16. Iowa, 22. Minnesota, 22. And Wyoming, 34. Those are who a lot of school districts are competing with for teachers. And we see that here in Sioux Falls, too. And then that last one we talked about, where would the dollars come from? We have to raise taxes, right? Well, I don't know. Or is it raising taxes, or is it a matter of priorities? When this funding formula was first went into effect, full year, 1998, 39% of the state general fund budget was spent on K through 12 funding formula, the K through 12 funding formula. This year, the year we're in right now, it's 29%. It's down 10%. How'd that happen? State general fund grew at 4.2%. State aid grew 2.4 from 98 to 09, while the rest of state government increased 5.1. If the state had maintained its share of the pie right now, the state would be contributing an additional $137 million. So it wouldn't even take any local property taxes, because remember, there's a mix. It's about 50, it's 53, 47 state local. If just the state side had just stayed at this 39 and the locals kicked in what they did now, schools would have $137 million more dollars. And it's across, there's been 3 governor administrations this. It's been, the slow leak has been across all of them. At the end of the Jankel administration, it was down to 35.7. At the end of the Rounds administration, it was down to 31.6. And of course, now it's down to 29%. So you don't have to raise taxes to increase teacher salaries. You can just lock it in right now at 29, and you'd get some growth. Well, I didn't know how long this was going to take, so I had an intermission scheduled, but we're not going to use it. All right, now we're to the interesting stuff, capital outlay fund. What's the purpose of the capital outlay fund? I already talked about it, but here's the law. It's provided the law to meet the expenditures which result in the acquisition or lease, additions of real property, plant, equipment, etc. What's going on with that? Well, right now the law says schools can go up to $3 per thousand on the capital outlay fund and levy that. You can be below it, you can't be above it, but you can go up to $3. So what's going on? Right now in Sioux Falls, our levy is about $19.4 million per year. That's approximately $10 million below the state per student average. If we were levying at what the average is across the state, we'd have $10 million more in our capital outlay levy. As a matter of fact, we couldn't even get to that because we'd hit the 3 ceiling before we could get to it. A lot of people think, oh, Sioux Falls, you've got all that valuation in your district. You can put up buildings left and right and whatnot. You've got a ton of money. It isn't true. There's 150 school districts in the state. We're about 120th in valuation per pupil. We're very below average. So, yeah, we're nowhere near levying at the average in capital outlay per pupil. Current projects under construction right now, if you looked over there when you came in, Robert Frost, adding 8 classrooms, Pettigrew and Discovery, we're adding 10 classrooms each. Major projects in our 5-year plan, they're not yet bid. The Jefferson Spanish Immersion School, $12 million roughly. Howardwood Field improvements, $4.4 million. We had a technology plan the other night at the board meeting that seeks to spend $13.4 million over 3 years. And you think, geez, that's a big number. But it's equivalent to spending about the cost of a fairly expensive textbook on a student each year. It's $190 per student per year. And then we have ongoing maintenance and repair of all the other buildings we have in the district. And we've got that at about $7 million a year over the next 5 years. So that's our major items that are on the docket into the future. So what's the issue? Well, Senate Bill 7 died today. It was pulled back because of the sponsors, but that's not the end of the story. What it would have done is restrict growth in the capital outlay fund to the district's total capital outlay levy this year that were just started, this calendar year. Remember, property taxes are paid on the calendar year. So we just started 2015 this year, or 3% of inflation, whichever is greater. It's a little bit new concept, plus new construction. Problem, districts that have not levied the maximum are punished. Well, those who are at the max are rewarded. There are many districts out there that aren't at $3. Sioux Falls is one of them. We're at $2.16. We look at our total school levy, and we try to keep the property tax down. Our school board does a tremendous job of weighing the needs of the students and the needs of the property taxpayer. And so we're sitting at $2.16. In 97, when we passed that bond, it was $2.58. But we lowered, I wasn't here at the time, to their credit, the district lowered the levy to offset the cost of that bond. And we've lowered it to offset the cost of opt-outs. And we've lowered it for other reasons, and we've offset other levies. So we look at the total school levy. So, like I said before, I kind of gave that away. We're $10 million below the state average. And if this bill were to pass, if Senate Bill 7 had passed as written, it would have cost us approximately $12 million over the next 5 years in our plan, because it would have been locked in at that levy. Now, Senate Bill 7 failed, but it doesn't mean the issue's dead. There is a group out there made up of folks from the administration, legislators, and school officials that have been negotiating a bill that maybe all three can agree is amenable to all of us. You have some other information. That's pretty good. I mean, it's fairly interesting, but I gotta. Look, we think there's a solution, and I'll cut to the end of the chase here. The solution would be to let schools go to the average and not punish schools that have been living below the statewide average. And right now there's a bill that isn't dropped in yet, but that's written that way, but not everybody's signed off that they think that's a good idea. But that would essentially let schools that have managed their levy at least go to the average before this kicks in. The high spenders, the ones that are at 3 or you could have a lot of property valuation and hardly any kids, so you could be at 2 and be way above the average. Those guys still get the benefit of what they've done in the past. But schools that have managed that levy, at least this would let them go to the average. Now, this other information is kind of about why the bill, is it even necessary? I mean, I know this is small, but it's point you to this spot right here, right in this area. It's like, well, you schools, you have this unlimited $3 levy. As valuation increases, and ag valuation has been going up, you get this $3 and you get to ride it up, and you get to increase at rates that nobody else gets to. Well, okay, so is the total school levy, we got 5 levies, is the total school levy getting out of whack? Schools were at 59% in 2003. This isn't my slide, this is a Department of Revenue slide, presented during the process of passing this original bill that became SB 7 in a summer study. And schools are now at 57%. So the school's share of the property taxes has actually gone down in the last 10 or 11 years, not up. Okay. So then it was, well, the ag valuations, they changed in 2010 to, we're going to value ag based on what they can produce, not what the land is worth, because that makes more sense. And it's like, well, the price of corn took off, the price of soybeans took off, the valuation of ag took off. So Sioux Falls doesn't have much ag land, but districts that have a lot of ag land, they set their levy at 3, they've gone way up, and the farmers are disproportionately, the ag landowners are being disproportionately hit by this. Well, this is a chart, another chart that was a Department of Revenue chart at that same meeting. The levy in 97, ag paid 27% of all property taxes. 10 years ago, they were 25. Last year, they were 25. Ag levies, ag is not being disproportionately hit. If you look at this, the one that looks like it's being disproportionately hit is owner occupied. It was the Ag Land Task Force that suggested this bill or these concepts. This is another one. And they said, well, schools are setting their levy at 3 and they're growing their fund balances. And you can see from 2000, from 2010 to 2011, the fund balance jumped from 100 million to 150 million. Well, schools are raising their fund, they're just pocketing the money. Because they can levy at this $3. This is a really busy slide here, but I don't know if there's any accountants out there, or governmental accountants. But GASB 54 hit in 2011, and it redefined what a fund balance is. And schools' fund balances didn't go up because they were pocketing cash. They went up because they redefined what a fund balance was. And what this is the state's comprehensive annual financial report, and they recognize that too. They write in there per GASB 54 and pre-GASB 54 because their fund balances jumped too. That it was an accounting change. It had nothing to do with actually pocketing money is the point of this. You can see that on that slide. And then last but not least actually it's second to last but not least, is the Sioux Falls School District. I told you we look at that levy, the total school levy, we try to manage it, and we feel like we're getting trapped down at a lower level than we should be because of good things we've done in the past. This is an actual house in Sioux Falls. It's within 5 blocks of JFK Elementary. We've tracked the taxes on that house since 2000, the school taxes, and just got the 2015 data in this week. And that house is paying $23 more in school taxes in 2015 than it was in 2000. And that's with a $7.5 million opt-out because we lowered the capital outlay levy to offset it. That's a 0.2% increase in 15 years. Just for context, I put in what's happened with the state sales and use tax per capita. And over that same period of time, it's up 77%. So every person in that house would be paying 77% more in sales and use tax over that period of time. And the property taxes on that house went up $15 or $22, $1.50 a year. And so we honestly feel like a bill like Senate Bill 7 or some other thing that doesn't allow you to go up to the average at least is punishing a district that has really tried to watch this. And, that's Sioux Falls.
Can you explain the opt-out and how that works for people?
Yes. Opt-out. I was going to show you some statewide data. The state property tax for schools the last 10 years is going up at a rate less than the sales tax. Same, not quite to the effect of here. It's going up about per student about 3.2% a year. The state sales tax is going up about 3.9 per capita per year. But it is state school property taxes are not out of control. Opt-outs. What happens on an opt-out is if you don't want to settle for the 47 and some odd dollars that the state says you can have in the state aid formula, you can do an opt-out. The board passes it. You need 2/3 of the vote. In our case, it's 4 out of 5, at least board members, to vote for it. And then it says you can raise all that money locally. And there's 60 or so districts that have opted out. We've opted out several times. Our current amount is at $7.5 million. You raise all those dollars locally. You have to do it for a set period of time. Our opt-out ends at the end of calendar year 2021 is what it does. And every time, and when you get your bill, if you all live in the school district and you got your property tax bill, and you saw this opt-out is costing you X number of dollars, and the bill for that house, the opt-out cost is more than what the house has gone up in 15 years. Because we have honestly gone, our school board's done a great job of going out of their way to try to make the opt-out, to put money in the general fund, not affect the total tax very much, and we're, very proud of that. So did that answer your question?
Benefit of it for the Sioux Falls.
Oh, the benefit of it is, this is, I'm just going to say this at the very beginning. This is funding 101, so I'll talk about the mechanics of the funding. I didn't want to get too much into the curriculum and whatnot, but since '97, since this formula passed, the types of things we added, and I'm thinking off the top of my head, and there's board members here, maybe they got other ideas. We went to full-day kindergarten. That's unfunded. We have roughly, 1,600 kindergarten kids, a teacher for every 25. If you could take that down to 800 and go half-day, that's a lot of teachers that you're funding that the state aid formula didn't fund. That's one. Our ELL population has grown. We do Literacy in Action, which is a reading program. It didn't exist back in 1997. That's a fairly expensive program. I don't have all those on the top of my head. But, the opt-out allows us to maintain programs because, quite frankly, we couldn't reduce the teachers, or we couldn't slow the teacher salary increases anymore. We're at 2% a year. We keep up with the state aid formula. That's it. So those other things allowed other programs that we could not have if we didn't have the opt-out. And I'm basically done.
All of our reading programs, quite honestly, Todd,
Right.
FAME and 3.8, all of that.
One last thing. I've been saying it. I just wanted to get it out there. Our solution for the capital outlay, and we're involved in those negotiations, is to allow school districts to go up to the per pupil average. You're not punishing those that have gone out of their way to keep the levy low, and we're not going to. One thing we heard is, well, then you'll go right up there. Well, we haven't yet. We could have been at 3 for the last umpteen years, and we haven't been there. And the other school districts, too. If there's a fear that you let them go up, that they'll go up right away, it hasn't happened. Those are the schools that are already there. The ones that aren't there are the ones that do things like manage their levy. So that's basically the presentation.
Your answer for the general fund for teacher salaries would be to change the 3% or inflation, whichever is less.
The index factor, 3% inflation, whichever is less. How do we increase teacher salaries and school funding in general? Our last best proposal was in 2010, which is 4% a year or inflation, whichever is greater, but not to exceed what the state revenues grow. So if the state's having a tough time, schools don't get 4. Well, the state goes backwards too. But if the state's having a good year, then schools wouldn't get 2 or 3 when the rest of the state's growing 7 or 8, which has happened. That was our,
I became aware a few weeks ago of a presentation that in the state of Nebraska, in this school district, the superintendent was sharing that the average state support per student was $9,600, and that statewide it was $11,500 per student. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I thought South Dakota that we were 46, and then I go online and I see we're closer to 48. And then if you look at other states, and it's kind of interesting, you read, you just Google what the state allocation is per student across the country. And how can there be such a large disparity? And I asked some folks in Pierre about this, and I don't have all the details, but was told told that actually the state support per student in South Dakota is closer to 10,000. And I don't know where that's coming from, but can you help us understand the disparity there?
10,000 sounds more like it would be closer to all revenue sources for schools, just off the top of my head. I don't have my stuff with me, but the state support,
Can you repeat the question? I mean,
Oh,
it
is the
being
state-
filmed, so
Oh, yeah,
I just want a small version of the question.
yeah, the question is legislators have said that the state support isn't 47 and a half, $4,750 per student. It's more like $10,000. That's the question, right? And my answer is I believe they're counting every revenue source, and that includes the federal, which we've talked a lot about tonight. That federal revenue, and there are about 20 districts that receive a lot more federal revenue than the rest of the districts in the state. And for the other 130 of us, that federal revenue can't be used to pay teachers more. You can pay the federal teachers, but you have to pay them exactly on the same scale as you're paying the other teachers. So you can't say we're going to use this federal money to raise everybody's salary. It won't work. You can't even use it to raise the federal teachers' salaries. So the $10,000 figure, and I don't have that number right in my head, but that would have to be all funds, all sources of revenue, not state aid. In state aid, there's about $620 million of state and local in the general fund, $630 million, something in that regard, and probably another 110 or 15 million in special ed. That's state and local property taxes too. So if you count them all together, it's probably 750 million divided by 129,000 kids. And that would be your state and local support, which would count the property taxes.
Wouldn't that 10,000, that's averaged across all 150 school districts, and as you said, impact aid, I think is what you were referring to. The Douglas School District, which is at Ellsworth Air Force Base, gets a large piece of that because of the transient population, and the school districts that are on the reservations also get a larger amount of that impact aid because they're federal, and so that isn't really an honest average because not every school district gets it.
Couldn't say it better myself, so I'll rest
Nicely
on
done.
that.
I always have a question. Some of the states around us that we're being compared to do have a state income tax. I am not proposing a state income tax. My question is, though, because in some of the states where they have a state income tax, they don't have sales tax on clothing and food and some of those things. Do you know, like, the average tax burden per citizen of South Dakota compared to the other states? When you figure in some of that and that maybe the differentiation of property tax and such?
I don't know. I haven't studied that. Joyce Molniski.
So-called Joyce?
Well, Joy
not Joyce.
Joy did a study that looked at, the tax burden of the surrounding states and found that really if you make the average pay, the tax burden isn't a lot less here than there because it's an income tax and the income tax tends to hit the higher pay. So when an average teacher salary is not in the higher brackets of the income tax, there really isn't a big factor, and that was that one slide I showed. And actually, the South Dakota sales tax is higher typically than most of those states we were looking at. So actually, the tax burden could be worse. But she didn't factor in the sales tax.
Well, they can't hear you when they're recording it. Sorry.
Say, Todd, in the Sioux Falls School District, the 30 cents per thousand that you can levy for pension,
Yeah.
does that cover the mandated 6% cost for teacher retirement?
Yeah, no. That's a good question. You can basically look at our total salaries and figure it's close to 1%. Was that mandate from 2001? And do I have that? Trying to get you an exact figure. I think it covers about half of it. I figured it out for a bill, and I was going to try to calculate exactly what it was, but I wrote a piece on a bill that's going to attempting to raise that half a cent, and I believe what we get there covers about half of it. And I wouldn't go to town on that figure, but it doesn't come close to covering it. No, the 30 cents.
With the assessment of ag land going towards production and now commodity prices falling dramatically, how is that going to affect the overall funding mechanism in the state?
Well, the one thing about the state considers the school districts one big school district when they set those levies, and they just say, we're going to come in at 50, the state, in this case the state, was going to come in at 53%, and the locals are going to come in at 47. And then they passed a law back in 2010 that said the ag is going to come in at their share of the 47%, the commercial property is going to come in at their share of the 47%, and the owner-occupied is going to come in at their share. So if the values of the ag land were to drop, the ag levy would go up. Now, it's an 8-year average, and they throw out, they call it the Olympic average. I didn't know that was an official term. They throw out the low score and the high score, and they use the 6. So they don't believe that levy or those valuations are going to drop much. As a matter of fact, I saw a projection. They have them growing 6, 7, 8% a year out to 2020.
Unless commodity prices stay low.
Yeah, I know that's their projection. They know more about it than I do. But if they did drop, if they did drop and the valuation dropped, the way the law reads is ag would still have to pay its share of the percent of the 47%. And that's why their levies have dropped so much. The general fund levy has dropped so much in the last 3 or 4 years. Other questions?
Thank you, Todd, for preparing all this. I have to admit it's a little above me, quite a bit above me. But if I could just ask a simple question, what can we as parents and grandparents do to help make some change?
Yeah, good question. If education's a priority, I'd say talk to your legislators and make them know where you stand on that. I don't get a lot of flyers anymore, but it seems like when I did, every flyer I ever had from a legislator said education was at least the top 3, and he was usually the top 1 priority. But my message, I guess, in that regard is fund your priorities. You can kind of tell where your priorities are by where your pocketbook goes. But you got to talk with your legislators and hold them to it, because obviously you don't drop from 39 to 29% and be a true priority, at least in my opinion. On that.
You also want to be specific though with your legislators, because you can't just ask for education funding. There's literally no appetite for that in peer. So you have to, this would have been a good opportunity to say, kill Bill 7, Senate Bill 7. If that's what we wanted to add, if that's what the direction would have been. Change Bill 7 might be what you want to talk about. But to ask for education funding, it is a good time now to email them, because they're not doing anything but sitting in session looking at their emails. So it's a good time to get to them. You've got a map for them. But I'd go back to, that's a long, hard fight at the state level. I kind of look back at the local level and what would it take to reinvigorate that task force or redo that task force, because Sioux Falls can make a difference locally. If we have to depend on the state to do it, it won't happen.
I agree. We have had some people say, well, you can just solve it locally and opt out or whatnot. I'm pretty proud of the tax record. I don't think schools should have to solve it locally. If it gets to the point where every school district has to opt out, then you've destroyed the formula. And I talked about my belief that the formula is good, because you're equal per pupil whether you're property rich or property poor. And we're not property rich here. We're property average in the general fund because we have a lot of commercial property, and we're property poor in all the other funds, because per student anyway, because the commercial property doesn't come in at 4 to 1 like it does in the general fund. So, but my point is, if everybody has to opt out, there are school districts that are property poor and they can't afford to opt out. It would cost thousands of dollars for what property they do have to pay for a similar amount to an average school district. So at some point, the state has to kick it in. We came close, we thought, in 2010. We had a good effort, and we got it through one house, and we were the Senate, and we were pretty thrilled. But it would have probably had to sustain a veto because the governor's office was lobbying against it, and it didn't get out of the other house either. But sooner or later, I believe, you see this happen. I mean, we predicted it in 2005. It wasn't much of a prediction. We're just going on what we'd seen for the last 10 years. It's happened for the next 8, and it's going to happen for the next 7. And sooner or later, it's going to, state aid is going to have to be funded like a priority in this state.
Just one more comment, and I'm on the school board, you probably recognize me. If you don't, that's good. But I'm Ken Albany, president of the Sioux Falls School Board. And what I would ask any of you to do is, if an issue comes up that you hear about in the news, and obviously education funding is well covered by our local media. If you see a story, if you hear a story, don't hesitate to send an email to the governor, contact your local legislator. They get tired of hearing school board members and the business managers of school boards beat the drum, but when the parents, when the grandparents, when people that have that stake in education contact them repeatedly, it is listened to. And, write individual letters, not form letters. They tend not to listen to those or believe those, but be active and talk to your legislators. Go to the coffees that are sponsored on the weekends during the session and get your story out there. It means more coming from you typically than it would from a school board member. Thank you for being here. Yes.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out too, and I'll let you ask your question. We have a place on the Sioux Falls School District website that if you go under the school board and look at current legislative bills, all the bills that are related to education are there. And it also states what the school board stance is on that bill. So, one thing we need to make sure that we do too, if this Senate Bill 7 is resurrected in some form, is to pay attention to that as well and make sure that we inform each other and also then our legislators on how we feel about that.
Just a small question, I guess. I'm curious, I guess I'm not too familiar with when a bill is proposed and gets shot down, because that formula you came up with makes great sense to me. It seems like it would work. Can you not propose that again, like year after year, or
Yeah,
does that work?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, we did. We proposed it in 07, we proposed it in 08, 09, 10. There was a few differences there. And then in 2011, the recession had hit, and nobody was going to go out there and ask for a bill like that. Now, could we come back with it this year? Yeah, maybe we could have. It seems like we're playing defense. And yeah, it's a good point. We should probably, and whoever else said it, we should try to look at studying the issue again and getting not more than school personnel and school board members and whatnot on, pushing bills, because that's a good idea. And honestly, I think the legislature did listen to the chamber a lot closer than they listened to us, and they were very deferential. But in the end, we didn't get our bill passed. But it's probably something that needs to be done again. It's a good point, because you're right. It isn't dead forever. It's just dead for 1 year.
Maybe a ballot issue.
Well, we tried one of those, and we tried to fund it, and that didn't work so well. Actually, it did better than other things that were on the ballot, but yeah. Hey, if anybody wants to ask me other stuff, I'd be happy to stick around. I thought I was joking about the 2-hour limit, but we're at 1 hour and 15. So, I don't know, time just flew, huh?
Thank you, Todd.